Now we are proceeding to the first session of the day about sustainable development. Our speakers are Mrs. Kanzola Anna Maria and Professor Petrakis, Professor Zairis, Professor Chimis, Professor Prodromidis, Professor Pierakos, Mrs. Kalokerinou, and Janetos Smirnis. Mrs. Kanzola, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I actually take this opportunity to sincerely thank you, Mr. Harkopoulos, for this opportunity to coordinate this session. So shall we begin with my presentation on the alternative futures of capitalism? I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Yes, you can start, and then you have to moderate the rest of the speakers.
Of course, of course.
And the whole session.
Okay. So I believe that you can see my screen right now in the presentation mode. Is this correct?
Yes. Yes, it's okay.
So one of the most puzzling things in social sciences is the prediction of the future. And it's really interesting to, first of all, connect the dots between the past, the present, and the future, because in order to understand how the future may evolve, we should always think how we came here as we are. So why do we use scenario building and foresight analysis and exercises? Well, scenario building and foresight exercises are effective tools in order to predict the future, but not only make assumptions for the future, but they prepare us for future fit policies, even if scenarios fail to describe with accuracy the future, we are always prepared for the various alternatives. So the consequences of past events and their interpretation of those past events, as well as the unavoidable forces of change, which are dynamic in nature, construct the future. So essentially, here we have this line of events where the past connects the present through history, and the present connects us to the future through the megatrends, which actually we use it as a broad notion right now to describe the forceful trends that drastically change the world in a really useful manner. So how we build scenarios. First of all, we have to distinguish scenarios in two types. So we have the explorative scenarios or first generation scenarios that aim at understanding rather than action. And then we have decision scenarios or second generation scenarios, which focus on decision making, and they are not merely outcome oriented, but they elaborate on the various alternatives. So one type of these scenarios is alternative future scenarios, which we are going to use at the present presentation. These are the most comprehensive scenarios, and they originated from Pierre Walk's work, and also they have been used in military exercises in order to predict the various alternatives of the future. So the most interesting part about this kind of scenarios is that they recognize uncertainty, and they allow us to imagine and incorporate both qualitative and quantitative variables in order to predict the future. So first of all, we have to decide about the type and the purpose of the scenario. And then we have to identify four critical elements. These are the general forces for change in the system. Let's say the globalization, technological change, and these forces for change are most likely the megatrends because they silently direct the future in certain directions, but we can feel them in the society. They alter the nature of job, they alter the nature of social interactions. So the megatrends are really important in order to predict the future. Then we have the predetermined elements, because even though there are certain circumstances, there are some directions that they are going to move forward. For example, technology is one of them. So we know that technological integration changes the nature of work. So we have to assume that this is not an unpredictable event. It's going to drastically change something. And of course, we have the key factor uncertainties. These uncertainties are ongoing uncertainties that we identify them, but we are not in a position to speculate about where they are going and how they are going to evolve. For the present exercise, we use climate change because even though we understand that we should proceed with the mitigation of the climate change, we don't know if societies are really going to take drastic measures to battle climate change. And of course, we chose the geopolitical landscape due to the ongoing conflicts in the Eastern Europe right now and the overall trend of multipolarity and deglobalization. So the third step is to add imagination and creative uncertainty and interdisciplinarity, because in order to predict the future, you need to gain knowledge for all the sectors of activity in a society. And of course, in this step, I'd like to say that even though we are speculating for the worst case scenario, we should always add hope, because scenarios impact our behavior, impact our expectations, and individuals need hope in order to build for the future. And then we have the production of the various scenarios. So the future of the capitalist economies is shaped at some degree by the megatrends. The megatrends, according to Naisbitt's work, originated as powerful transformative forces, and they are of social, political, and economic nature. And we can see that everything regarding megatrends is really interconnected because, for example, let's take the economy. We have these deglobalization tendencies which actually alter the geopolitical landscape, but also it's connected to the political realm, and of course the changing power dynamics, and of course energy, and all of this stuff impact through rising uncertainty and geopolitical tensions the society. And of course the society right now has to battle climate change, which of course leads to biodiversity loss, health risks. These are connected with population shifts, the rise of inequalities, and we go back to politics where we have a cultural backlash situation, and of course the rise of populism, and we've got democracy at risk. So all these are connected again with the economy, and they ultimately alter productivity trends and how individuals perceive economics, and of course the role of the economy in order to provide for the society. So taking in mind all these critical elements of change, we can generate the scenario matrix, and we have 4 scenarios which are placed according to the key uncertainty factors. So we have to assume that there is always a possibility for a growth scenario, which is basically characterized as if the economic cycle right now had a major boost. And of course, there were geopolitical stabilization as well, and of course, climate stabilization. On the other hand, in the case that we do not have climate deterioration, we should assume that the unsustainable growth scenario is more probable. But of course, there are some degree of geopolitical stabilization. The transformation scenario describes an economy and a society that is really green oriented and probably aims to degrowth strategies, is more alternative kind of capitalism, a more sustainable type of capitalism, which actually, even though it's being characterized at some degree by geopolitical instability per se, it's really more stable in terms of climate stabilization. And of course, we have the downfall scenario, which actually is the worst case scenario. And of course, it's being characterized by geopolitical conflicts and climate deterioration, and it challenges economic structures in our lives as we experience them today. So these scenarios, the scenario describes drastic changes for the economy and society for the worse. And this is actually a little bit of a summary of these scenarios. Also, let's add some elements. So the growth scenario is probably the most positive scenario. And then we move to the unsustainable growth scenario, where we have a political short-termism, we have uncertainty, intolerance. In the transformation scenario, individuals are probably more energetic in the political field. They actually prioritize inclusive growth, green growth. And of course, the downfall scenario is characterized by great uncertainty and individuals that are really afraid of what the future holds and what they can do. And they have existential uncertainty as well, because they do not know where they are going. So can we assume what is the prevailing scenario? Well, scenario exercises, unfortunately, in this term, alternative futures, does not really indicate us what the future is and how it's going to be presented, because the future of global economies depends on the priorities and goals set by societies. So in the case where profit maximization and short-term orientation are the drivers of capitalism, and of course capitalism remains as we know it, the future will vary among the growth scenario, the unsustainable growth scenario, or the downfall scenario, depending, of course, on the impact and the degree of the short-termism in policymaking and the tolerance or otherwise in uncertainty, and of course, how megatrends impact the shaping of the future. On the other hand, actively regulating economies to adopt sustainable forms of capitalism will be closer to the future development described by the transformation scenario. So consequently, we cannot decisively answer which scenarios will prevail, because we can only speculate given the contextual factors and the key factor uncertainty. So the future could meet any of the 4 scenarios, and also it could fall between those scenarios. But also there is the possibility that it will not resemble any of the scenarios due to unpredictable black and swan events. Is this actually a failure of the futurists? No, it's not. We haven't failed because we prepared ourselves to imagine the future and to take actions for a better future. So no, all scenario exercises are not really in a position to predict with occurrence the future, but they are always preparing societies and policymakers to imagine the various alternatives and prepare themselves. And that's the importance of scenario building, as well as having an interdisciplinary view of the world. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to present this work to you. And this is actually me concluding this presentation, and actually I'll stop sharing right now. And I would like to welcome Dr. Zairis Antonios with the next paper that regards the alternature of work due to digitalization and the importance of culture in a digital environment. So, Dr. Zairis Antonios, the floor is yours.